We're going to move on to the next panel now, and I'm going to pass over to Caroline. We're going to go to monetizing the meme economy, and I'm very excited for this panel because I definitely was one of those people who bought Dogecoin at the start of the year. So we're ready to dive in. So I'm going to pass to you, Caroline, and let's get going.
Great, thank you so much, Michelle. And first of all, thank you so much for having me on. For anyone who doesn't know me, hi, I'm Caroline Bowler. I'm CEO at B2C Markets here in sunny Melbourne. It's been just a fantastic day. I've been absolutely glued to this whole conversation and it's been such a wild ride, and can't believe I get to follow up a talking sushi. So thank you very much for that. Exactly as Michelle has said, this section is going to be, it's entitled Monetizing the Meme Economy, which is a pretty snazzy title, I have to say. I think for many, the big headlines in our space have long been grabbed by the prices fetched by the likes of Beeple and so on at different auctions. And perhaps in some way that's been something of a limiting exercise, in that it means that people only view NFTs solely through that lens of the monetary return. But monetizing, really though, it can be about value, about enhancing or creating value. And so for the likes of investors and founders, that value can be at the heart of their decisions. So for this discussion, I want to frame our comments and discussion solely around the concept of value. Now, a quick introduction to our speakers before we get into it. We have Rohen Sood, who is a general partner at Reinventure. John Henderson, same, he's the GP at Airtree VC. We've also got Sebastian Quinn joining us, who's the founder at Yieldly Finance. So, on to the questions. First of all, the theme of community, I think, has really resonated throughout the day. And the importance of community is used when looking particularly at NFT projects to buy in or to invest in themselves. Adam McBride described NFTs earlier as a bridge to fans and community. But then on the other side of the equation, Kai Turner said that market forces corrupt the fun of the game when the crypto economy is central to game outcomes. So with that quick kind of backdrop, I'm going to go first of all to Sebastian and ask him, how do you manage to stay on the right side of this equation at Yieldly? And in fact, if you'd like to first of all explain Yieldly and what the work is that you guys are doing, and then kind of dive into how you manage that balance.
Yeah, definitely lovely to connect Caroline, and delighted to be here on the panel with the others. So Yieldly, we are the largest DeFi product on the Algorand blockchain. We currently have around 20,000 users, about 160 million staked across various smart contracts, and we were sort of one of the first, I guess, on Algorand to be utilizing the power of community in NFTs. We had a world record when we launched the first NFT prize pool about 4 weeks ago. We had 25 million US staked to win a single NFT from our community. So, the value of community and the importance of community as it applies to NFTs is sort of front of mind with us. So to answer the question, or just sort of kick it off, I guess the simple answer is that we build products that matter to our community. We build them on Algorand, which is an important counterpoint. I think we've heard a couple of people talk today already about them, but it's a $20 billion carbon neutral protocol, with terrific tech, but it seems to have sort of very little fanfare in the market. And so why do NFTs matter? To our community or others, and we sort of think through that from the point of view of what are they? As it stands, we sort of see them as the social currency, the sort of allowing for the interconnection of these sort of various subcultures that have existed, sort of disparately existed across the digital world, that now have this sort of shared language or this shared interest, and sort of bringing together these wonderfully disparate, ecosystems, with digital ecosystems, and providing a central point for that. and how do we know, I guess, how do we know that the products, you know, matter to our users? You know, who are our users, I guess? We know that they value authenticity, you know, they value humor, and they value community, you know, and that they're geographically dispersed. And typically, I know Mark was just on the panel, and you know, forgive me, Mark, but they're typically, you know, our generation or younger, so millennials and Gen Zs, with some wonderful exceptions, obviously. You know, so it's kind of a really nice context to sort of frame, I guess, the rest of the conversation. I can, you know, say, you know, some of the products that we've built and you know, why they matter. You know, our products are kind of costless to engage in. Like, we don't charge people to use them. The staking pools, you know, you can join. It's very unique. You know, from a transaction cost point of view, it's extremely inexpensive. We know the community like that. I sort of talked about the records. You know, I think currently we have maybe 50 million US stakes to win sort of 6 or 7 NFTs. The other thing that is like critical is that the NFTs that are being created are all community driven. You know, it wasn't something that we initially thought. I mean, we built smart contracts for, you know, a specific DeFi, you know, product or problem that we were solving on our grant. But, you know, our community has been, you know, loved the brand that we had and have built NFTs out of that. So our first sort of creator that we sort of highlighted in that you know, first pool was a guy called Stitch Bob, you know, who'd been selling likenesses of flamingos, which you know, is sort of the thing that sort of sits on our Twitter, and everyone in our community just started uploading them to their profile pics. So you sort of saw this happening, and you know, we just had to respond. You know, we have to build products that matter. So, you know, community driven, you know, critical, and since you know, a month ago when we started the NFT part of our business, we've had sort of, you know, 300 plus creators reach out, wanting to do stuff with us, you know, looking to create, wanting to build NFTs and do stuff, you know, related to our brand and for our users. So, you know, it's a tremendously exciting piece to be in. And at no point, you know, did we have to think through any of the, you know, I guess to pick up on one of the counter things is sort of the grubby part of, you know, the monetization of it. You know, it's not been a feature or an issue for us.
If you, from kind of how you've described it, you're talking about authenticity, you're talking about the sense of humor, you're talking about it being very much organically driven from the community itself, rather than there being perhaps a more calculated decision in how things are going. So that more organic, as you say, and I know for ourselves at B2C Markets, a lot of what we do like that is taking that feedback, and we get a lot of feedback, but taking that feedback indirectly and trying to digest it and manifest it in the best way that we can to give people what they need. And oftentimes, you know, I can't make the best decision. The community tells me, and from the sounds of it, it's the same kind of decision with you guys as well.
Yeah, definitely, and I'm sure, you know, without putting words in Rowan's or John's mouth, I'm sure that they'll speak to the value that is created when you, you know, have very short feedback loops with your users. You know, when you get, you know, 20,000 people screaming at you about things in Telegram or on Twitter, it becomes pretty clear what matters and what doesn't, and what products people want and don't. So, you know, when, you know, as you're saying, you're getting a barrage every, you know, inundated daily, I'm sure, with feedback. You know, it's a very privileged position to be in, to get that, to have users that are passionate, and then to have the team to be able to build stuff that matters. So, you know, it's a, you know, it is a very joyful and, you know, and happy spot to be in. And, you know, we sort of want to continue to understand that and curate it and build stuff that matters.
And just kind of as you say that, I'm thinking through the comments that we've seen across today, that joy, that engagement, that captivation with the subject matter, and it's infectious. And for anyone who, you know, for us, that is an everyday experience in crypto land, right? It's just, whether it's a negative or a positive, people are engaged and they are community and they are vocal, and it makes it such a different place to be in than any other kind of business or any other sector that I've ever had engagement with. And yeah, as you say, it's wonderful, this new economy that we're working towards. So if I can then just pivot over to John, because I suppose likewise for you, John, when you, and you're known for having quite a lovely collection of NFTs yourself, when investing in NFTs, how do you assess some of the better known projects against that metric of, you know, being a bridge to fans and community versus a market force that can corrupt? What's your view on it, and how has it kind of influenced your own decisions?
Oh gosh, well, thank you firstly for the compliment. I think there's a deep irony in the people who had, you know, zero art collections all of a sudden being acclaimed for their JPEG collections. But I'll take it, and I'm happy that you said that. Look, I mean, I'm reluctant to give advice here because, you know, JPEG Summer's been going for 7 or 8 months. So anyone who claims to speak with expertise on, you know, how to assess these things, I think is very much still in learning mode, and I'd put myself in that category. The way I look at it, I think question one is, are you buying art or are you buying something else?
Right.
And if you're buying a piece of art, then like, who cares, right? Just buy something you like. So I think the question's only relevant if you think you're investing or you think you're buying access to something. If you're in that kind of latter category, then to me, it sort of breaks down into, are you buying sort of a privileged access to a group or community or club or whatever that gets you some benefits? Or are you buying access to some kind of roadmap that will give you some benefits? Or maybe are you buying access to an income stream? Like, I'd put it in those 3 categories. And maybe just to, I'll be quick, but just to give you some examples. So the first NFT I bought was a punk in, I think, February of this year, which is obviously a fairly punchy entrance to the NFT world. But the reason I did that was I'd hung around in, I mean, I'd been sort of put onto them by Flamingo DAO, and then I'd hung around in their Discord for a while. And it was just super clear to me that by being a punk owner, you got access to all kinds of things that other people didn't get. So I kind of loved the history of punks, but as soon as I had one, I was in all kinds of subgroups. People took my opinions more seriously for some reason that I still can't explain today. And so there's this kind of just benefit for being a part of a group, if you choose the right group that has flow on things. And I've invested in all kinds of things that have kind of come through the punk community. So I think, like, when I talk about community, I kind of talk about, what I mean is access, is sort of point one. And you don't need NFTs for that, by the way. Like, I'm also a member of Friends with Benefits, the access for which is a fungible token. Like, you just need to own 75 FWB tokens and you can be in that group as well. So I think NFTs are like one way to do that, but not the only way. And then that second category I said is kind of the future value or the roadmap piece. And I think Bored Apes is a really good example of that. Like, when they got established, they laid down, like, you know, this isn't just an avatar project, we're going to add to this. And we've seen this recently with the release of Serum and Mutant Apes and all kinds of value that have accrued. So I think if you're investing, then trying to pick a team that's going to build stuff that's going to be valuable in the future is useful. And then I think there's a whole really interesting category of NFTs that cross over with DeFi. Like, if you look at Incoom cards, which came out of the Ohm community recently, like, that's an NFT that specifically gives you access to future income streams. Crucibles and Alchemist are another really good example. Like, I've got Klima sitting in a Crucible at the moment, which is basically acting as a non-custodial wallet. So I think there's a bunch of, like, very clever NFT DeFi crossovers, but that's broadly how I break it down, like, sort of access, enduring value, or some kind of revenue stream.
So just as you're saying that, I'm sitting here making notes. I mean, that's the point, I think, for anyone looking at this space. There's so much to learn, and there's so much still, you know, even for me, the whole day has been a school day. I've got just sheets and sheets of notes of all these different projects I now have to look up and kind of get more familiar with. But that's really fascinating, and it's really interesting to understand the mindset behind even yourself. I mean, when you're talking about how you bought your first punk in February, maybe it's because it's COVID time, but February to me feels like as if that was 5 to 7 years ago. Yeah. And it kind of was actually said to me, somebody was saying to me recently about say fintechs are accelerated at a speed of 5 to 7 times traditional finance, that crypto is 5 to 7 times the speed of fintech. But DeFi and NFTs are a further multiple again, in that just the speed at which everything is going through is quite fascinating and exhilarating.
Well, I think the best example of that is Loot. Like,
right.
Dom dropping something completely free, it getting sold out in 3 hours, and then just the ecosystem that grew around that in a space of weeks is, I've been investing as a sort of Web2 venture investor for 10 years now. I've never seen anything like that. And I think it's what you can achieve with a community that is sort of economically incentivized to build is something that's never been possible before.
And what do you feel it was that was particular about that project then that drove that? Was it just the timing? What was it, do you think?
I think it was two things. I think one, well, maybe three things. I think one, Dom had a big reputation from Bloot and from his previous projects. So he came with social cachet. Two, I think the drop was done in a completely fair way, which appeals to people in crypto. You didn't have to buy into it. There was no bonding curve, nothing like that. And then I think the third thing, people just got excited about a new primitive. A string of text as a way to build an ecosystem around an NFT, I think was just really interesting. And a bunch of crypto people obviously used to be Dungeons and Dragons nerds. So that helps as well. But I think those three things kind of catalyzed a movement, and who knows what will happen? Like, it could fizzle out. And there's a kind of an existential question about, is the game the ultimate outcome, or is everyone playing the game right now? And I think that's a really interesting question. But you would never see that kind of activity outside of NFTs and decentralization.
Well, I think that's probably fair of most of the content we've heard today, that you wouldn't see those kind of conversations happening outside of this kind of a community and with some of the conversations that we're hearing. But thank you for that. And I'm going to come back to you again in a bit, John, but I want to just pass over to Rohen. Raymog earlier on today took us through the 3 different types of storage for the metadata, and I know that was a conversation that was held across a few different pieces today around centralized, IPFS, and on-chain. Just want to get your take on it, Rohen. I know obviously you've got some views, so we'll be here to hear your take. Keen to hear your take.
Yeah, absolutely. And good to be here with everyone. Before I get into that, I just want to kind of touch a little more on what John and Sebastian said as well, which is that, it's really interesting to see all the stuff that's happening in NFTs. And at a macro view, I suppose the way I've been thinking about it is that it's really another dimension in a world where, time and attention are the most scarce assets. NFT seems to be another dimension to really kind of get people involved and have a community around. And that's been, I think, a really, really interesting to see, and seeing how some of these drops and projects have been galvanize a lot of interest from ownership and a bunch of mechanisms to kind of do that. Now, in terms of the question, I think it's one of the key questions that I actually was asking myself when I first got into this space as well, which is like, what am I actually buying? Like, what NFT, sure, okay, there's an image and maybe it's access and social tokens, but where does it sit and what does it really mean? And it's interesting to see that actually most of the kind of NFTs sit on a centralized server somewhere. So you buy the token. Really what the token is doing is pointing to a URL that might be stored on an AWS server somewhere, right? Which is actually the antithesis of decentralization, if you think about it. And we've actually had examples of X copies in the past being actually completely lost because he released it on some really early marketplaces that went defunct, and they've been gone forever. So that's kind of the base case. So we're moving away from that, and now there's more and more, projects saving things on IPFS. But even that is kind of had an interesting evolution. So the Beeple work that was sold for $69 million originally, kind of pointed to our IPFS hash. But if you dug deeper into it, it was actually pinned by Makerspace, which is any NFT marketplace, right? So if Makerspace went under, then that pinned FPS would have kind of disappeared as well. Now, I'm sure that's evolved since then, and it's been kind of pinned in other places as well. but really you're still relying on somebody pinning the IPFS, on a node somewhere. Now you can run your own node, but that's a non-trivial exercise. And maybe you do it if you spend $69 million, but if you spent 100,000, then less so. And there's other interesting technologies coming out like Arweave and Pinata that allow you to do this in a more easy way. The third kind of iteration of this is, the on-chain stuff. And this is where it actually really, really clicked for me. I remember I got into art blocks like back in like March, April, and it was just like one of those light bulb moments. It was like, oh my God, this is insane. And it's this idea that you can store pretty much most or all of the kind of information on chain itself. So you're not pointing to a server somewhere. So for example, I guess I'll break it up into two different versions of that. So one is something like art blocks, which is actually so the code that any image you see is being completely rendered by a code that's been written by someone. No one's drawn it, or there's no kind of visuals behind it. It's literally all code driven. So that code itself is stored on chain. But some of the libraries that are called, P5.js and other kind of languages, that's kind of in the open source. That's not stored on chain. The other kind of version of that is something like autoglyphs, right? Which is completely, and the entire thing is on chain. And when I think about art, right? And I know John mentioned this as well, a lot of us weren't necessarily art lovers before we kind of got into NFTs and crypto, and I'm one of those people. But, art generally also signifies not just a visual kind of something like visually, but also a key moment in time. And to me personally, on-chain art is a really interesting and powerful statement because we're digitizing, we're living in a digital world, and we've created true digital ownership for the first time, and having that art stored completely on-chain is just kind of fits that theme thematically really, really powerful for me. So when I think of like a 10-year kind of horizon, and this is not advice, it's personal view, I'm really attracted to on-chain pieces. But I definitely think the IP Fest and the RVs, those things will get better and better, and we'll be able to do more stuff there. There's an interesting kind of reverse correlation though as well, which is the things that are most easily stored on chain, like CryptoPunks, Lava Labs just recently put them all on chain. They're visually less, I guess, dense or kind of more simplistic because it's cheaper to store stuff on chain that is simpler. Whereas if things are quite visual, then you have to kind of store in a centralized server or using one of the IPFS or RV technologies because it'll be cost prohibitive.
I think what's really, thank you for that. I think what's really interesting about the points that you're making are, these are the big infrastructure questions that we have to figure out now that we're at the start. And for us, even as a crypto exchange, and we've been around for a number of years, and crypto itself is almost like, it's been around a while at this stage, we assume, but still hasn't quite yet gone to that level of mainstream. But because we still grapple with those questions ourselves about, the self-custody of crypto, and then to take to the next level, that self-custody of NFTs. And there was a point made earlier, I think by Hannah Glass on one of the sessions, where she said about how, in time to come, we will no longer be talking about NFTs. We'll just be talking about the thing or the object. And it's the same, I think, with crypto, that you will be talking about the technical pieces of it, because all of those will be smoothed through, already done and dusted. But one of the points that we found quite interesting, if I may, we're looking at custody solutions, obviously, as an exchange. And when we look to overseas markets, there is a far stronger tradition, if you like, of self-custody, which we don't have in Australia. Australians seem to be much more trusting, if you like. And I think that that's where it's going to be a bit of a learning curve for the Aussie NFT owner, in whatever capacity it is, whether it's art or experiences or what have you, about understanding the need to navigate, having a MetaMask and all of that. I mean, even for myself, I still find, okay, I've got to try and remember the different steps to get through it. So there is still that little bit of a small education to go, but that's what's so exciting about being in at the ground floor as we are, and that we get to answer these questions, and then in time to come be able to say, yes, we were there when those decisions were made, or we had some part to play in shaping and influencing and moving things along. So yeah, very, very exciting, and also super nerdy, which is great.
No, totally. But I think that's the great thing, is I think that's what makes it exciting, is that everything is so early, right? And I mean, this is a bit of a cliche to say, but I think you know, it does feel like, you know, what the internet felt like 20 years ago, right? When you were kind of hacking around, like trying to download things on BitTorrent or Napster and like going to forums, etc. There was this level of uncertainty, chaos, and possibility, right? Which maybe we've lost with all the kind of shine. But I'm sure, you know, I think that also creates a lot of opportunity as well.
Yeah, and I can remember when I was, this is when I was an undergrad in Ireland, so this is in the mid to late 90s, and we managed to break into the postgraduate computer labs, and we saw, you know, it was just, our minds were blown, because they had a desktop computer with a camera on top to one at the other end of the room, and you could project your images to the computer at the other end of the room, and our minds were blown that we'd just seen the future, and obviously we know how that all ended up. And
but this is maybe,
go on.
Oh no, I was going to say, but maybe this is one of the reasons why NFTs is so interesting and exciting, right? Which is that, you know, I think crypto's been around for 10 years now, and it's kind of been focused on investments and finance, which is all great, you know, like, I mean, Reinventure is a fintech fund and crypto fund. But now, for the first time, we've kind of jumped into, you know, I guess, creativity and art in a way that we haven't before. And I think it's that unpolished stuff, but also the ability to create at the same time that I think gets people excited, because, you know, rather than just kind of being a consumer, you are part of the story, right? You're involved, and you're involved in a way with crypto and that you never knew before, right? You actually can buy a token and you can kind of go on this journey. So yeah, I think it's super exciting.
You've also raised, Caroline, your point on self-custody. Your point on self-custody is a really good one, though. Like this is one of my great worries, to be honest. Like I think JPEG Summer in particular has onboarded so many new users, and you know, I've had tons of friends that I've sort of helped out with that. But you know, you go on this journey, right? Like of people with hot wallets with terrible passwords, which just scares the bejesus out of me. And then they go and buy a ledger, which is good. And then, I mean, maybe I'm on the more paranoid end of the spectrum, and I probably shouldn't give away my whole OPSEC. But like I've got, you know, private keys split up in bank vaults, and if we're in a world where self-custody is a necessity, which I think it will be, I sort of feel like we need better answers for that, because nobody is going to do stupid things like I am and drive between banks to get their private keys. Like we need kind of a sensible answer that's going to work for people. And I think that's one of the big challenges of DeFi is like self-custody.
So kind of sharding keys, but for individuals rather than for organizations.
I don't know what it looks like, but I feel like if I, as an investor, if someone pitched me something that solved that problem in a compelling way, I think there's a huge opportunity there.
Well, you've heard it here first. So actually, with that question in mind, you talk about custody. One of the other themes that we had for today was around scalability. And I know pretty much every conversation touched on it in some way or other. So Rowan and John, again, your respective organizations have invested in a very well-known layer 2 solution, one of the best known Australian projects. What other value opportunities lie ahead within this section, within the scalability, with other chains, for example, or you know, what are your thoughts on it with scalability? John, if you want to answer that, or Rowan, if you want to go first.
You go, Rowan.
Sure. Yeah, look, it's definitely interesting. My kind of lens in this is that you know, there's a couple of things I've got, you know, sitting around banging around my head, and also just it was really interesting seeing, you know, we invested in Immutable kind of 2-3 years ago, and it was interesting seeing their journey and what they were learning as they were solving problems, right? And they didn't start necessarily as a scaling solution, Immutable X, right? They were kind of slightly in a different path, but that became one of the key things they saw as a challenge when some of the DeFi stuff was exploding, and they said, well, how does this really work with scalability in NFTs? So I suppose this is the exciting thing about being in this space right now, which is that there's a lot of opportunities on the edges of people trying to solve, right? Like, so actually kind of keeping close eye on the ground with the projects you are working with or the founders you're working with, and going like, what is it you're trying to struggling to solve, right? And I think that's going to be the next horizon. Now, the two things for me that actually are pretty interesting, if I'm going to be specific, is one is actually on onboarding, which we've just talked about, right? Like, so I 100% agree. It's onboarding, like you, you know, trying to get MetaMask and then like, you know, say the private keys and do all sort of things, it's a lot of work, a lot of effort, and most people just aren't going to do it, right? Now there are chains that are trying to simplify that with just the email, credit card, etc. So I think there's a really good opportunity there. We've actually just closing investment now in somebody that's doing exactly that onboarding journey in the DeFi space, right? But I think the same thing is required across different streams in crypto. And the second place for me, it seems like a really obvious opportunity apart from onboarding, is actually dealing with all the bots that we've got, right? There's like so much bot activity on so many different, marketplaces, etc., and not necessarily the good type of bots either. So if somebody can solve that for smart contracts and for layer one solutions, I think that's a really, really interesting opportunity as well.
Cool. John, do you have anything more to add to that one, or?
I was going to take it in a different direction. So you were sort of asking about scalability. I think, I mean, we're both investors, Rohen and I, in Immutable, and that's a bet on Ethereum, right? Like, I think the other question, the other way I would take your question is which layer one wins for NFTs. And I think the fundamental trade-off, as everybody understands, is between decentralization, security, and performance. And so Ethereum is clearly the most decentralized option other than Bitcoin you have with the best security, but you take a lot of performance and cost hits for that. And so Immutable is a bet that security and decentralized matters, and you try and optimize on Ethereum, but inherit the sort of long-term security that brings. But it's not necessarily the answer, right? Like, you know, what Dapper Labs has done with Flow and what Top Shot is doing is a sort of counter-positioned, lower security, high performance network. And I think there's competition coming from Tezos with Hen, and Solana's doing its own thing. So to me, the big question is, when we think about NFTs, and maybe this is most acute when we think about gaming, is I think most users today care most about speed, cost, and performance until they don't. And I think the point at which they don't is when something becomes super valuable, or when a system becomes hackable. And how that plays out over time will be really interesting. But I think Rohen and I have both placed a bet that at some point security really matters.
Right. And I'm just seeing the time, and I also see that Steve Ballas is back in, which means that my time is up, which is very disappointing, because Sebastian, I wanted to come to you and ask you about the building of a community and how on earth do you do it from the ground up, and also your choice on Algorand. But we cannot for this in the spirit of time. However, we could probably take this one onto Twitter and have a discussion there. Sebastian, if you're on there, I'm going to find you and track you down. In the meantime, then, thank you very much to John, Rohen, and Sebastian for coming on. Steve, it's 5:45. I'm handing the baton over. Away you go. Take it away.